Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or Sorcerer's Stone depending on where you are in the world, marks his entry point for this behemoth of a franchise. It's the first book turned first movie, but today we're going to be looking at its game for the PS1. Now, I do make that specification because there were many iterations of this game for seemingly every available platform at the time, all to varying degrees of success. There was a version for the PS1, the PS2, Xbox, GameCube, PC, Game Boy Advance, and even the Game Boy Color. Obviously, because of the success of the franchise, developers were trying to get this thing on as many platforms as possible. As these were all made with different developers, customers' enjoyment and overall gameplay experiences really was at the mercy of whichever version you got. Now, I got the PS1 version coincidentally as a gift for my birthday, and just as Harry received his letter on his birthday, this only made me feel more sentimental toward the game. I was just like Harry Potter, for real, getting something so exciting on my birthday. A gift that would take me to another world. Only difference is, I guess, is that I wasn't subject to abusive guardians that locked me under the stairs. Mine locked me under the house with all the redbacks, but I digress. Let's have a look at the game and see if it still holds up today. Regardless of whatever version of Harry Potter you play, there are some very crucial things the game needs to nail in order to be successful. It needs to have a variety of spells, take us through key moments from the books or movies, and most importantly to me, it really needs to sell you on the fantasy of being a student at Hogwarts. Letting players freely explore Hogwarts, discover secrets, attend classes, and fulfill that desire of being a wizard or witch. So how did the game do? We get a quick retelling of the origins of Harry, where he's been staying, being told he's a wizard, all stuff you're familiar with. The game quickly moves into Hogwarts, Harry is placed into his house, and the player starts the game in the halls. Now don't be scared, these renders were how the game looked on PS1. They are a little scary, but it's something you get used to. We're quickly introduced to horrifying renders of Fred and George, who will spend the game asking for jelly beans in exchange for portrait passwords. We then see Ron, who is equally terrifying, and then we get our first exchange with Malfoy, and oh boy, it's a doozy. Within the first 5 minutes of this game, Malfoy has this to say to Harry.
Go home to your mother, Potter. Oh, sorry, you don't have one, do you?
So after wiping those tears away, we get into the action. We learn how to jump, do some light platforming, we start learning spells, and the game somewhat begins to open up. You'll see doors start to open. It starts combining our running, jumping, and spell casting with requirements to move larger objects to get across the room. It's all very basic requirements to today's standards, of course, and the game helps you out even further with these markings on the ground, so it really becomes something that you have to try to fail at. We then quickly move into a Quidditch training course where we're required to fly through these hoops, and thankfully you can invert the controls here. We then learn a new spell through these quick time events, and then we give Malfoy a beatdown by having to target and throw crackers at him. Now I mention all of this because to a certain degree, all of these actions, minigames, and functions make up the rest of your 3 to 4 hour gameplay from this point on. Aside from a couple of instances like moving these things over vents to cause an updraft, or sneaking around with the invincibility cloak, the game will just recycle all of these mechanics to its own detriment. One of the game's biggest problems is its obsession with busy work and minigames. Even with a short runtime of 3 to 4 hours, the pacing drags under the weight of constant distractions to the point where I started to actively loathe it. The game relies on minigames so heavily that they feel like padding, filling in for an actual structured experience that connects the story beats in a meaningful way. Take for example, the simple task of catching fireflies for Snape.
Go fetch the jar of fireflies from the adjoining room.
He claims they're in the next room, but instead you embark on a ridiculous detour through the castle. You wait for trolls to step on vents, you save some kid's cat, sneak past a bunch of other stuff just for one ingredient. Is it excessive? Absolutely. But worse, this sets the tone for the rest of the game. Much later on, when you visit Diagonally, not diagonally,
Diagonally.
Hagrid tells you that you need to go ahead and get a bunch of items while he kicks back in the pub being a fat lazy shit.
I'm off to the leaky cauldron for a few butterbeers if you need me. I'll meet you when you're all done.
But before you can get any of those items, you of course need money from Gringotts. Now that sounds simple, right? Wrong. You need to get knuts, sickles, and galleons, which are the coins or the money in Harry Potter. First of all, you have to run around the bank collecting paperwork on this slippery ass floor. Then you ride the minecart, dodging obstacles while collecting knuts. If you get hit, you lose the money, and if you don't have enough money by the track's end, you're forced to try again. Here's the kicker. You have to repeat this whole process separately for the sickles and galleons too. So that's 3 rounds of paperwork collecting and 3 rounds of cart riding just to get your own damn money. But wait, there's more. Now that you finally have your money, you think you could just buy the items you need, right? No, your coins don't buy items, they buy the privilege of doing more mini games. You need to get a feather, so how do you get it? You have to hover over a peacock until you build up enough feather meter for it to drop a feather. You also need another one, and to get that, you need to feed some birds. You also need warts, so you need to find the frogs in the box and scrape off the warts. And what was all this for? Helping Hagrid's stupid fucking dragon, a subplot that is so pointless that it never comes up in the game again.
Home again at last. Now we'll give the dragon tonic to Norbert.
Dude, fuck Norbert. All my homies hate Norbert. It was at this moment that I realized the game isn't structured around any meaningful events from the story. It's just a conveyor belt or sausage factory of pointless minigames, quick time events, and time trials between cutscenes. Every spell you learn, press buttons in order. Putting Fluffy to sleep, press buttons in order. It's the same recycled mechanics over and over. And as you get to the end of the game and you start to think it's over, the final stretch doubles down on the nonsense. The chess game doesn't play like chess at all. You just have to kind of maneuver these pieces into each other so they kill one another. You're then guiding a sleepwalking troll and moving shit out of its way. You fight the devil's snare in some mindless boss fight and dealing with spinning magical cups. What is this? What the fuck am I doing? By the end, I wasn't engaged. I was just exhausted. As the game goes on, the presence and frequency of the padding only gets worse and more prominent. This means the further you get into the game, the repetition only becomes more apparent and blatant, which will lead to a severe decline in your enjoyment. Another point of disappointment was the combat. We spent all this time learning a variety of spells, yet the game does not let you choose what spells you want to use and when. The game will place sparkles above an item or an enemy that you can cast something on, but the spell that you use is denoted by the color of that sparkle and the players get no choice. For me, it really did detract from the feeling or sense of control, and I felt entirely restricted by the game. I would have loved something where I could equip or assign spells to a particular button and decide what I want to use and when. The combat is already basic enough, and oversimplifying it in this way only made it less engaging. It's basically on autopilot. It's just aim, maybe lock on, press the spell button, and have the game do the rest of the work for you. So outside of the horrendous padding, busy work, shallow gameplay, and a lack of engaging combat systems, what else does the game offer? It actually does a fairly decent job of letting players explore Hogwarts and allows them to find secrets. Granted, they're fairly easy and mostly behind bookshelves that turn around. These bookshelves are very easy to find as they're about half the width of a regular bookshelf. So no need for the Revelio spell here, mate. These will lead you to more collectibles like jelly beans, wizard cards, and more minigames, shit! The game also has many more doors for you to enter, and you'll notice that many of them have padlocks on them, which will eventually unlock as you progress. This was a great way to slowly drip feed and open up the game to players without dumping them into a very confusing and large map. There is no mission marker or minimap, so gradually allowing access to new rooms was the right move to avoid confusion around this surprisingly large map. It was also incredibly satisfying to see how many doors were opening and how much of Hogwarts was becoming accessible for me to explore. I was also surprised at the sheer amount of variety and locations on offer here too. You have Hogwarts to explore with the many rooms and hidden locations, you have a herbology class, sewers, the grounds, Hagrid's hut, Diagon Alley, a few shops in the alley, and the list just goes on. It did a wonderful job at trying to get us into as many locations as possible, which I really appreciated. Now, while you're exploring the halls of Hogwarts, attending class and collecting your beans, you are constantly being followed by this hooded figure. This guy's trying to kill you, but if I'm being honest, I'm actually questioning his commitment to the bit. He makes one gargoyle come alive, he makes us fight 2 knights at a time. I just don't feel like his heart's really in it. Anyone familiar with the material, whether that be from the books or the movies, could guess that this mysterious man in the hood is both Professor Quirrell and Voldemort. At the climax of the game, we enter into a tedious boss fight with them where we need to shoot spells into the mirror of Erised. And when I say tedious, I mean tedious. You have to wait until Voldemort moves in front of a pillar for you to shoot it for it to fall on him. He will sporadically shoot these spells out at you, which are very easy to avoid, and then you get tangled up in these ropes all of a sudden. It's weird. So once you drop enough pillars on him, we move into the second phase, which is just like the previous phase, only no more pillars. You have to avoid his attacks and keep shooting spells into the mirror, which sends out a giant energy blast. The last phase of the battle will see Voldemort on you while you rapidly press square, with quick moments to press X to hurt him. Once the battle's over, the game is essentially done, and the pacing really felt off here, and overall it was just quite rushed. We bounce around from plot point to plot point with no real connective tissue outside of some pretty poor looking storybook recaps. Had there been less focus on jamming in as many minigames as possible and a little more on expanding and connecting these crucial story moments, the game would have been so much better. The game very loosely followed the plot of the movies and the books. In terms of fulfilling the fantasy of being a wizard and exploring Hogwarts, it did a pretty great job for the time. However, the overall experience was entirely dragged down by its over-reliance of tacked on, unfulfilling minigames to offer very little to no value to the overall gaming experience. But hey, what do I know? This game went on to sell over 8 million copies, became Argonaut Studios' most successful game, and landed the game its position as 6th highest selling PS1 game of all time. There was nothing else like this at the time, and when the game really let players explore and immerse themselves in a fantasy of being a wizard, it was truly magical. It's just a shame that so many things ended up taking away from that magic. Maybe the other versions were better.